If you're a fan of the Malaysia My Second Home visa program, more commonly known as MM2H, then you're probably already aware of the major announcement that was made by the Minister of Tourism and Culture on the 15th of December. He said that there would be changes to the requirements for the fixed deposit for the program. I want to say two things about MM2H. And if you're really happy about the changes in the fixed deposit, what I have to say might dampen some of that happiness. Because many people right now, I think, are getting overexcited about something that really isn't good to get excited about. Let's put it that way. A lot of the stuff in the press is misleading, or maybe a better word is incomplete, and there's two reasons for that. One is that politicians the world over tend to meet the press and speak extemporaneously, off the cuff, without a script, so to speak, which in many cases is not a bad thing, but sometimes details are important. And the minister should not have announced a major change in one aspect of the visa program without at least talking about the other requirements. Because a lot of the stuff I see on the internet right now, especially on YouTube, are people announcing that the only requirement for MM2H is now the fixed deposit. Now, I heard what the minister said about the fixed deposit, but I also heard that he didn't say anything about the monthly income or the proof of liquid assets. So as someone who's followed the program for a long time, I think those changes have yet to be made, and those are the two, at least the monthly income, will determine whether or not the program is a viable retirement program again. So I have two things I want to say. The first thing is, I don't think MM2H is a retirement program any longer. It started out that way in 2002, but when the program was suspended at the beginning of the pandemic, they made some changes to it. And I think if we sit back and just look at the changes and what they are, and then look at the fixed deposit modifications that the minister announced, a sensible person will conclude that the MM2H is an investment program now. It's not a retirement program. When MM2H was started in 2002, the requirements to qualify for the program were relatively reasonable. The average retiree could easily meet the requirements. So anyone who wanted to live in Malaysia as a retiree would need to supply or prove that they had 10,000 ringgit of income per month, which works out to about between $2,000 and $2,500 a month, depending on exchange rates, and they fluctuated quite a bit since 2002. They also had to make a fixed deposit in a Malaysian bank of 150,000 ringgit. Those were the only two financial requirements for the program when it was first launched. Now, there were some fees, of course, to apply for the program, some government processing fees along with that, but those are incidentals. At the time that the program hit its peak, there were over 50,000 visa holders on the MM2H program in Malaysia. Now, I don't know how many of those were actually applicants and how many were dependents, like spouse and children or anything like that, but the total was a little over 50,000. People who have visited Malaysia like Malaysia. If you go there, I guarantee you, you're going to like it. It's a nice place to visit. I've lived there since 2012. I can tell you it's a nice place to live. for a lot of different reasons, which I've made other videos about, and I'm not going to go into here. Now, I'm not sure that I would have applied for the MM2H program. I don't know if I want to be a retiree in one country. I like sort of just wandering from place to place. But that's how the MM2H started. A lot of people did take up the application, and a lot of people were living in Malaysia on the program. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, applications for MM2H were suspended. People that had their MM2H visa, of course, kept it, but they weren't taking any new applications. And the government said that they would be taking a review of the requirements for the program. And then throughout the pandemic, Malaysia was pretty much on lockdown. But the new requirements for the MM2H program were announced in 2021, and they were devastating. All of a sudden, the fixed deposit became 1 million ringgit, and proof of monthly income went from 10,000 ringgit to 40,000 ringgit. 40,000 ringgit works out to about 9 or 10,000 US dollars. And then there was also a requirement to prove that you had about 1.5 million ringgit in liquid assets. So anyone that was actually considering the retirement with those new requirements pretty much stopped thinking about applying. In fact, over the last year or so, it's been announced that applications under the new requirements dropped by 85%. So applications just dried up for the program. No one that was at retirement age who was actually retired could afford it. How many retirees have a $10,000 monthly income? So if you look at the requirements, you can see that clearly they've shifted. The government has shifted from one of trying to attract retirees to one of trying to attract investors. That brings us to the recent announcement of 2 weeks ago, December 15th, 2023. The change only applies to the fixed deposit, not any of the other requirements. And some of my YouTube colleagues have jumped the gun, so to speak, and said that all the other requirements have been tossed out and that the only requirement is the fixed deposit. That might be true, but I don't think it is. But anyway, the new tiers, the new fixed deposit requirement is organized in tiers. There's 3 of them. The top tier is called Platinum. And for a deposit of 5 million ringgit in a Malaysian bank, you can apply for a permanent residency status. Permanent residency means you can stay there as long as you like. You can come and go, and you can say that's your home, that's where you live. The next tier down is called the Gold level, and that requires a fixed deposit of 2 million ringgit. And for that, you get a 15-year residency permit and a multiple entry visa. And for the third level down, which is called Silver, you get a 5-year residency visa, a residency permit, and a multiple entry visa. And that costs 500,000 ringgit. And all of these, the gold and silver levels, of course, can be renewed if you want to renew the visa when it expires. The platinum level, of course, it's a permanent residency, so it doesn't have to be renewed. That's the only change that has been announced. There are now 3 levels for the fixed deposit requirement. Nothing else has been announced about the proof of monthly income or proof of available liquid assets. No one has said anything about those. So anyone that tells you that those don't apply anymore either has some kind of inside information or is just flat out wrong. And the way I understand visa programs, it wouldn't make any sense at all if Malaysia were to completely get rid of those. You have to have some kind of outside income. And any visa program that offers residency by investment or citizenship by investment usually requires proof that you're able to support yourself. So I think it's highly unlikely that the government would eliminate the other two requirements about the monthly income and the liquid assets. This chart on the screen now shows the different requirements, at least the financial ones, that have applied to the program since its inception. You can see the 2002 requirements were the lowest and the easiest to qualify with. The middle column is the changes made in 2021. That's when applications for the program dried up because the requirements increased so drastically that the average retiree no longer qualified. And the third column, of course, is the changes that were announced regarding the fixed deposit. If you look at these requirements, you can see that it's geared towards investment. There's a reason for everything that governments do, and the reasons are not always made public because either the minister or the officials don't announce them, or reporters fail to ask follow-up questions, or they're just things that they don't want the public to know. I don't know if any of those apply to this program, but I do know that the idea of attracting wealthy investors is to help alleviate some of the residential property overhang that exists right now in Malaysia. There's a lot of properties that simply have no buyers. And if you're going to bring in wealthy investors to retire there, they're going to be interested in purchasing homes. There are downsides for a foreigner to buy property in Malaysia, which I'm not going to go into in this video. It's far too complicated and relatively uninteresting. But you can look that up. So to all the MM2H fans, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't think this is going to work out the way everybody hopes. If the other requirements remain the same, then nothing has really changed except for the absolute lowest level. Instead of 1 million ringgit fixed deposit, it's now at 500,000. It's still out of the range of most retirees, especially if they leave the 40,000 ringgit monthly income and the liquid asset requirement. So I think it's time to retire MM2H as a retirement visa. It is not anymore. Started that way, but now it's something different. The last thing I want to talk about is the nature of a fixed deposit by itself. The fixed deposit in the MM2H program has to be put into a Malaysian bank, and you're not allowed to withdraw any of it for the first year. After the first year, you can take 50% out and buy a house, pay for medical expenses, and there's other details there too that you can use it for. But a fixed deposit right now in Malaysia goes from 2.6 to 4 something percent, which is not really that good when you compare it to other kinds of investments. You can get a much higher return in the stock market, usually. The only thing that makes a fixed deposit attractive is, generally speaking, you don't lose money on it, and the money is fairly safe. That's if the inflation rate is low enough. Now, Malaysia has a published inflation rate of 3.3%, which is pretty good. But it also subsidizes 4 gigantic commodities within the country with petrol, rice, sugar, and cooking oil. So those prices for those commodities are kept artificially low. But if the real price of those were considered in the calculation for inflation, I think it would be much higher than 3.3%. So you're going to lose money in your fixed deposit. Now you can look at this two ways. The first way is you're going to lose money. And for some of you, that might be a bad thing. The other way to look at it though, and this is a good thing about the fixed deposit in MM2H, is that once you deposit that money, that's still your money. There are other countries that have residency by investment or citizenship by investment, where once you pay the money, that money is gone. You're not going to get it back. So with Malaysia's program, at least, you get to keep the money. It's just that the return on it is really not that good. So you'd have to decide which one of those is better for you. Are you willing to accept a lower return in favor of the residency, or do you want to get a higher return on the money that you have, in which case you'd have to forego the visa program and invest it somewhere else. The one thing I'm surprised that no one's talking about though, and this was included in the minister's announcement, is that for the first year of this change to the fixed deposit, it only applies for Chinese citizens, citizens of China who want to come and live in Malaysia. Now, I thought that was kind of unusual, let's put it that way, until I started to realize that Evergrande, the big Chinese investment company, real estate company, is on the brink of collapse in China, which could have major economic consequences, not just in China, but all over the world. Evergrande has a lot of exposure in a project called, I think it's called Forest City in Johor, which is in the southern part of the peninsula of Malaysia. And if you can get, the property down there is almost a ghost town. Very few people live there. Lots of the properties are priced more highly than the average Malaysian can afford. Part of the rescue plan is to get foreign investors into Forest City, have them buy up the land or the apartments, and help. Certainly isn't going to fix Evergrande's problems, but it may help. It also may help, of course, Malaysian investors who have invested in the Forest City project. The reasoning behind that, Evergrande, China, is just pure speculation on my part. I have nothing to back that up except a reading of the tea leaves. Finally, I'd like to stay informed about the MM2H program. So if anybody hears anything about further changes, especially to the monthly income requirement, I'd appreciate it if you could leave something in the comments or else send me an email. My email address is in the description down below. You just send me an email and let me know. It's always been something I'm interested in, so I want to stay on top of it. Until then, be seeing you.